Always good, especially. Hi, everybody. We were just chatting backstage, Matt, Pauley, and I, about, it's always nice to talk sports when elections and politics swirl around us. But we're going to kind of intersect a little bit sports and election night because with Matt Pauley, I'm Tom Ackerman. It's great to be along with you for the Gashouse Gang. Episode number 3. We are just steaming along here. On Mondays, we're a 4-man crew. Bernie Miklasz, Kevin Wheeler join us. Yesterday, Wheels and I talked some ball. And now Matt Pauley, the host of Sports Open Line, is with us. Hello, Matt.
Hey, Tom. I enjoyed yesterday at the start of your show where you and Kevin were reflecting on you listening to him back on Sporting News Radio back in the day and you not having a kid when he first met you and everything. It's fun. And, you and I, because you work mornings and I work in the afternoons into the evenings, our lives and our broadcasts don't intersect all that often. So I'm glad with this, we're finally able to do more stuff together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm super proud. I've known you a long time. Can I give some scoop? There's a little story about you coming out.
All right.
Yeah. You know about that, right?
I don't know if I know.
Yeah. Okay. A little something in the works, I think. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
A good one. Yeah. Yeah. A little behind the scenes on Matt Pauley. I won't say when or where, but a little something brewing. So, because, by the way, you work hard and people should know about the good things that you do. So that will be appearing here pretty soon, I would say, out in the world. But anyway, I also saw a lot of people around here in the newsroom working hard. And I know you did too. It was a big night, but there was a little bit of sports involved in that. So last night and into this morning, the sports betting amendment 2 went all the way to the wire. I mean, down to unbelievably 3 million votes and 7,000 votes separated yes and no. The yeses got 50.1% and the no's got 49.9%. Incredible, actually. I haven't seen one go down that close, maybe ever, but it did. And sports betting is now legal in the state of Missouri. Talked to Cardinals president Bill DeWitt III. I'll tell you what he had to say about that. But first, let me get your initial thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of tentacles to this. First off, I don't want to get political on this. The one thing I never really understood was for people who live in, say, St. Louis, Kansas City, parts towards the northern border and southern border of Missouri, where there were neighboring states had sports gambling, I never completely understood the people who are really, really against it. Because if you live in the St. Louis area, you can drive across the river and you can go place a sports bet, and that's tax revenue that's going across the river. If you live in Kansas City, you can head to the Kansas side. Now, for people in Columbia and Jefferson City and some of this part in the middle of the state, if you are morally opposed to gambling and sports gambling, I understood where you were coming from a little bit more, but it already existed in St. Louis. So let's just go ahead and keep that revenue on the Missouri side of things when it comes to that. I think this is going to have a huge impact on. There's a reason, Tom, that all the teams were for it. There's a reason that you were able to talk to Bill DeWitt III about it. I think when it comes to the Cardinals, the implications of this goes beyond just another revenue stream for the Cardinals. But I think when you think about the fact that they're still trying to figure out their TV deal, if they're going to be on, produce it themselves through the facilities of MLB Network or go back to Diamond, which was Bally and is now FanDuel. I know FanDuel doesn't own those networks. It's just a naming rights agreement. But you've got the Cardinals with Ballpark Village and what was Bally Sports Live. I mean, there's a lot of areas where there's a lot of intersection going on right now. And this legalizing, I think, is going to have a domino effect on a lot of areas in the world of sports.
I agree. And, Bill DeWitt III, you're right on the money. I mean, he obviously wanted this for business reasons, as well as the Blues and City and the Chiefs and everybody else in Kansas City, because it is another opportunity for sponsorship money. That's big. You also have the introduction of the sport to young people. So there are a lot of people that might want to place a wager or might be interested based on they have the access on their phone. And that's the one thing he said. This is mostly an online betting situation, but he left open the possibility. In fact, there are plans to do something at Ballpark Village in the area of a walk-up window. He said it's a little early, but some part of Ballpark Village would be for that traditional walk up and place a bet, but not overwhelmingly so. Like, it's not going to be you walk in and you're suddenly in Vegas. Like, he knows that some people don't like that. So, Ballpark Village will be as you remember it, but there may be a section of it that is dedicated to scores, stats, keeping an eye on games like the traditional sports book would be. And then you walk up to a window and you place a bet. But mostly, this is an opportunity. Two things. One, for the Cardinals to make a little extra coin. Two, for Missouri to make a whole lot of coin and not let it walk away. One thing he assured me, and I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on politics, but there was a strong opposition out there going around that there was uncertainty about where the money will go for education and how much. And he assured me not only is the money going to education, but it is going to be a big number. They really patterned this after Connecticut. And in its first year, Connecticut made $40 million in tax revenue. He said a piece of that, he didn't say how much, but a small piece of that goes back to the Gaming Commission. And then $5 million is set for problem gaming. The rest of it goes to education. And so he said that's going to be a big number, and it's protected by the Constitution. So they felt like that was going to help them. And boy, I mean, it was 2:30 in the morning when he found out that it was going to happen. I watched it in the morning and it looked like it was going to be official. And then it did finally this morning. But it is a big deal for the Cardinals, for the Blues, and for City. But for our point here in about baseball, it's not going to suddenly bring, Pete Alonso and other free agents to St. Louis, but it does give them some sort of flexibility. The TV deal they're still working on, without going into specifics, they felt pretty confident they could have something in place here fairly soon.
Yeah, everything you just said is spot on. I have this gut feeling they're going to stick with Diamond and that they're going to be back on FanDuel Sports Network next year. I feel like if it was going to be the other one, and the other side of that, maybe people don't realize it's a joint partnership where the Cardinals actually have some ownership in what is now FanDuel Sports Network. So if you walk away from that, you're walking away from something that you own. And if it makes sense to do it, you do it. But that's another side of all this.
I'll jump in and say, just on the TV thing real quick. And obviously I do work part-time for Bally, or now FanDuel Sports Midwest, but I'm not speaking out of school here. I'm just saying in general, whether I'm here at KMOX or at FanDuel or wherever, I want more people seeing the Cardinals games. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things they're trying to do is lift this antiquated blackout rule. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, you got to let people see the game. You got to be able to sell your product. And so what they're working on is a model where you'd be able to see it traditional cable, perhaps we'll see, but definitely through streaming and be able to access the Cardinals. So we'll see where all of that goes.
Yeah, I do think that no matter what, whether they stay with Diamond Sports or if they do move on to their own thing, that there is going to be a direct-to-consumer streaming option. If they take less money from Diamond, part of the renegotiation is going to be to get rid of these blackouts. So I would assume that that's going to happen. I do think that the added revenue from gambling can help pad the situation where you're not going to be making as much money off TV. They're going to try to create as much revenue as they can out of their TV situation, whether it's re-upping with Diamond and whether it's getting subscribers for their direct-to-consumer option. But the money is not going to be the same. The $1 billion deal that they signed with Diamond all those years ago is not going to see the end, and they're losing out on some revenue there. So if they're going to lose out on revenue there, where do you make up for that? You make up for it with sports gambling. And there are a ton of revenue streams that can come to you. Major League Baseball is officially partnered with multiple sports gambling outfits, and they got all on it. And look, for some people, I've heard John Mozeliak talk about this very candidly. For some people, baseball and sports gambling, and you think about Pete Rose and you think about Shoeless Joe Jackson and you think about the number one rule in baseball for players is you do not bet on the game of baseball. That is worse than almost anything you can do. I understand people who are very, very uncomfortable with sports gambling starting to infiltrate the game of baseball, but it's happened. It's happening. Major League Baseball has made the decision to go all in, and that's kind of where we're at right now. And there's no turning back. So you might as well go create some revenue off it.
Yeah, baseball's had a firm rule for years. It's right there, first thing you see in the clubhouse. I mean, there is no betting on baseball. It's very simple. Pete Rose was banned from baseball for it and is still in his passing. The discussion came up, but he was banned from the game and did not make it into the Hall of Fame. And I think they've been pretty firm on that throughout their existence, coexisting with sports gambling, going way back. And so, no, I understand any concerns, but it's a form of entertainment. Again, don't let it overtake you. And that's why the problem gaming, $5 million will go to that. And that's why they discuss it. I'm not sitting here like a proponent for it. It's already done. I mean, they've already voted yes. So I'm not like trying to sell anybody on anything. These are just facts. So it'll be interesting to see where it all goes. And it'll be interesting to see what the Cardinals do. Again, this is not suddenly pumping money back into payroll. I mean, the Cardinals are set on cutting payroll. My question to you, Matt, is how much are they going to do? Like, is this it? I mean, they just cut $52 million. They cut, let's go through the list real quick. So they declined the options on two of their starters, Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson. Their reliever, Keenan Middleton, unfortunately never got to pitch for them. Paul Goldschmidt, the former MVP, Matt Carpenter, one of their legendary players, and then, of course, Andrew Kittredge, who of the six, you could argue was the most valuable. Mm-hmm. And you would not be wrong. But I think he probably gets snapped up by somebody, don't you? So I don't know. There's $52 million right there. Is that it? Or are they going to do more?
I think there'll be more between Sonny Gray, Wilson Contreras, and Nolan Arenado. I think either one or two of those players will be back next year. I'm fairly confident in feeling that at least one of those players is going to be gone. I think they got to take a good hard look at Miles Mikolas and say, does this guy do more for you, not as a Cardinal than as a Cardinal? If you're trying to make this youth movement, him holding a rotation spot doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Or do you try to move him on where you know that you're going to have to eat a lot of his salary? They're going to have to look at Steven Matz, and you probably eat some salary on Matz, but what at the $11-12 million he's at, that's not actually a ton of money. So you might be able to get out from underneath of him with another team picking up a little bit more. So there's kind of different tiers. I mentioned that first tier with those three guys, and then you get kind of that Matz Mikolas tier after that. I don't think it's going to be a complete teardown. I still think that deep down, this team wants to be competitive next year. But I think they want to do it in a way that they set themselves up better for the future. And like we've talked about on this show many times, I don't think you have to squint that hard to see a way where they go with some young guys and their results can at least be somewhat similar to what they were this past year. Now, in a year where you're competing and trying to win at the highest level, what they did this past year is not acceptable. But for a year that's kind of a rebuild year, a transition year, if you're sitting there and you're in legit contention for the playoffs in August and September, and then you can really pour gas on the fire moving forward in years after that, I think it's a pretty good spot to be.
Somebody who is really getting some great things going right now in the fall league is Thomas Saggese. This came up in a conversation with Kevin Wheeler yesterday about the future of the Cardinals' super utility position middle infield. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. He brought up the thought that, hey, the Cardinals could possibly take some calls for Brendan Donovan because of Saggese's a great play in the Tommy Edman realm. Would they keep Donovan? What do you think? I think momentarily we might have lost Matt Pauley. Well, I'll tell you what I think. Brendan Donovan was one of the best hitters on this team, and I'd be very careful about losing Brendan Donovan right out of the gate in this movement. I mean, I think he's somebody that is cost effective, who you could use at a very high level and build this young core with him, because a reliable player who can play multiple positions. Matt, talking about Brendan Donovan, what I was asking earlier was Thomas Saggese, who is actually hitting really well in the Arizona Fall League. Does that entice you, as Kevin Wheeler brought up, to take some calls for Brendan Donovan? I'm opposed to it. I mean, I listen to anybody, but I think that Brendan Donovan's one of the guys that I keep. I think I'm looking to deal other people way before him.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on here. First off, there's does it make sense just from a big picture standpoint, and is it something that the Cardinals would do? Making sense from a big picture standpoint, sure. Like I get that. You got Thomas JC. This organization is very good at producing these type of players who can play all over the field and can contribute and everything. But Tom, you and I both know how much the Cardinals love Brendan Donovan, love his impact on the clubhouse, love the way he plays the game. Like he's everything that this organization wants, and I just don't see them moving on from him. There's a handful of untouchables, and to me, I think this is just me looking at the way the organization kind of does things. I think Donovan is pretty close to being an untouchable because this goes well beyond his production on the field. I think they like what he brings as a guy in the clubhouse.
I agree with you. Let me throw it out to you since I threw it out to Kevin yesterday, and we got into this a little bit Monday with Bernie, but in terms of, is there anyone over the other? Gray, Contreras, Arenado, Helsley. Let me throw those four at you, and you can add another name if you want as to people that they will take phone calls on or have a chat with to kind of gauge where they are. Those first three that I mentioned, Gray, Contreras, and Arenado, are definitely going to have that conversation, aren't they?
Yeah, and look, I think Helsley's getting moved no matter what. Like I didn't mention him earlier because I just think it's a foregone conclusion.
Yeah,
It
his value is extremely high.
Yeah, so they're gonna trade Ryan Helsley. I think they've already had conversations. I know you talk with Mo fairly often. Mo had a conversation with Martin Kilcoyne over at Fox 2 after one of the World Series games, and Mo during that conversation said that they've already had conversations with a lot of these players, and these players, for the most part, like the direction that the team is going. One of the things that, Bernie brings this up a lot, and I don't think Bernie's per se wrong, but one thing that I saw that I don't think anybody really expected to see was in the second half of the season, Nolan Arenado went all in on being there for the young guys. I mean, he was the one who was in the dining room till 1 o'clock in the morning, hanging out with young players. He's the one that when the hotel flooded, players came to his room to sleep on his couch. Like he took this approach that if he wasn't going to be producing at the same level that he had produced previously, then he was going to help the team in other ways. Does that turn into him being the guy who wants to continue to have that role, or is it really he just wants to go play for a contender? He probably just wants to go play for a contender. Bernie and everybody else who says it is right, but I also don't think that we're considering as much as we should be considering kind of how his mentorship role changed in the second half of the season this past year.
Yeah, I hear that. I absolutely hear that, and I think there's a balance there. I mean, he makes a good chunk of money. So if you're going to trade him, someone's going to have to take on a lot of money. So, your suitors are for Arenado are going to have to need a third baseman. He doesn't play anywhere else. And they're going to have to be able to take on that kind of money and have a core around him. Not that he's a bad player, but he's not the offensive powerhouse that he once was. He might be able to recapture it a little bit if he's in a lineup that has a little more length than the Cardinals have been able to offer. Their offense just did not come through last year. Looking at the Cardinals offense in particular, who do you think Brant Brown will be able to put his magic touch on? Or who would you like? I mean, my number one is Nolan Gorman. If Nolan Gorman could turn things around or just be a little bit better. I mean, what, he strike out 151 times, I think was the number, in his 300, and I'm just off the top of my head, 360 or so at bats. It's just an absolute ton. If he could just get him to have that approach that would cut down on that and unlock some more of that power, who knows?
It's Gorman and Walker. Those are the two guys. If they each take a step forward, the offense is automatically so much better than what it was before. And if Gorman takes that step forward, all of a sudden you've got more of a plan at third base because he came up as a third baseman. Yeah, do you lose something defensively going from Nolan Arenado to Nolan Gorman? Obviously you do. That goes without saying. But if you can trust Gorman to be a middle of the order run producer, you can put him on third. You can eventually get JJ Weatherholt over there at second, and you've got an infield that looks really good. Or maybe even you talk about Gorman a little bit over at first base as well. That's going to be a spot that's revolving. So if Gorman and Walker end up being middle of the order bats, run producing bats, that makes up for everything that you didn't get from Nolan Arenado and Paul Goldschmidt this past season.
Yeah, it's a really outstanding point, and I do think that the Cardinals pitching, when I look at the rotation, it could use an upgrade. But I mean, from Memphis, I mean, I want to see some of these young people. Before we talk about that, though, let me talk about the catching position, since we've now touched on third base with Gorman possibly replacing Arenado. We will talk about pitching here with Sonny Gray, but I want to concentrate on Contreras for a moment. The catching situation right now for the Cardinals, do you feel good with where they would be if Contreras left for the future with Pages, Herrera? Are they good enough, and how close do you see Crooks and, for that matter, Bernal?
Yeah, so this is a really good place the organization is in from a catching depth standpoint. It didn't really seem like they had a plan post Yachty, and now a couple years later, they've got a lot of really good talent in the system. We didn't see a lot of Wilson Contreras this year, so it was a lot of Pedro Pages and Ivan Herrera. Herrera is obviously the better offensive player. Pages is the better defensive player. Even if Contreras is back, I think you keep all three of those guys on the roster, and maybe you get both Contreras and Herrera a little bit of time at first base. Contreras obviously would be a DH a lot when he's not behind the plate, but getting Herrera first baseman's mid, I think, makes a whole lot of sense. Even for when that next group with Crooks and Bernal getting there, if you want to keep Herrera's bat around, first base DH is a spot for him. Look, Wilson Contreras is that middle of the order run producer, elite bat. When he was in the lineup and when he was playing, you could easily make the argument that he was the best offensive player for the Cardinals. If they move on from Wilson Contreras, that is a lineup taking a step back. We just talked so much about Walker and Gorman taking a step forward and how that can really help the offense. If Wilson Contreras goes away, it's going to be a step back. But I do think that is one area with Pages and also with Herrera, and with those guys coming up, they can make up for it defensively. And then you just hope that Walker and Gorman and you hope Newt Bar stays healthy for an entire season. Things like that are able to make up for the potential loss of Contreras.
How do you see the rotation right now? If Sonny Gray were to move on or stay, either way, I think you got to make a few changes, don't you? I mean, I like Steven Matz. He's a nice guy. But that's 3 years in a row now that he's been sidelined by injury. I can't put my money on Steven Matz and Miles Michaelis, who throws the dreaded straight ball that gets wrecked. You know, when he's missing his spot, it's difficult. It's difficult to absorb. So the rest of the rotation, Palante certainly has to be in the mix. And, you know, there's no doubt that the Cardinals have some up-and-comers that could be joining and making things really interesting.
When I talk about the rotation for next year, I don't talk about Miles Michaelis and Steven Matz, Tom. And until we're 2 weeks out from opening day and they're still on the roster and they're making starts in Grapefruit League games where they're being lined up for their spot in the rotation, I'm going to continue to not talk about Miles Michaelis and Steven Matz. When I look at the rotation, if it's a rotation that's led by Sonny Gray and Eric Fetty, and then Palante's your three, and then you fill in on the back with Michael McGreevy, eventually Quinn Matthews, probably not at the beginning of the season, maybe Gordon Graceffo. I didn't think he did a bad job this past year. I'd be interested to see what it looks like for him. There's some other young guys there. That's the avenue that I take, and there's going to be some growing pains on that. But I like that group as a rotation, and I'd be excited to see what they could do.
Matt Pauley, we are going to hear you on Sports Open Line, and we're going to talk about you get into other topics as well. There are a few things going on around here. Just some headlines. Robbie Avila, 2 weeks out for the Billikens, is much better than what I thought was going to happen after he re-injured the same ankle. So the Billikens, I think, dodge one there, but we'll see. Philip Broberg, 6 to 8 weeks with his leg injury. I think the Blues dodge one there. That one seemed, and I hoped that it was not going to be a season-ending thing for him. What a talented defenseman he is. But they got to figure out. Looks like he'll start being reevaluated and maybe coming back right around the same time as Robert Thomas. Hopefully there are no injuries in between now and then. But boy, oh boy, did they get some great news on Dylan Holloway, who just said a little while ago that he is feeling good, or at least the word out is that he is feeling good this morning after a very scary incident yesterday in which he was hit in the neck with a puck. Went to the bench. They start waving over medics and Ray Barilli, the trainer, and they get him out on a stretcher. Unbelievably scary and bad moment as the Blues went on to win the game. That's all anybody could think about.
Yeah, that was one night where the final result was secondary to what happened there, and it's actually surprising stuff like that doesn't happen in hockey more often. That's a dangerous game to play, and there's skates flying around and pucks flying around and sticks and everything. I mean, just the fact that there are not more scary situations like that is probably a bit of a surprise. You're just glad that he's okay. Got to the hospital last night. His family was actually in town for I think his mom and dad, or maybe just his mom, but he had family that was in town that were able to go to the hospital with him. So scary situation. However long it takes him to get back, that's how long it takes. He was not skating today. Now, from a hockey standpoint, with Robert Thomas out, they were already really thin at the center spot. And now you look at the four that they've got centering lines right now. It is just, it doesn't look great. And they're going to try to survive this 6 weeks where they're going to be without Broberg and without Thomas. They're going to have some things go their way because the depth of the top end of this Blues team has really been depleted with injuries.
Holloway was not on the ice for practice, says Jeremy Rutherford of The Athletic, but he was at the facility today and said he's feeling way better. Okay. So that is incredible news. Really great to hear as the Blues, those two players they received from Edmonton, Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, very close together, suffer some very tough injuries. And in Holloway's case, things looking on the upswing. So that's outstanding. You did not have Sports Open Line last night or Monday. Yeah. So what the heck are you going to do tonight?
Yeah, we've got full 2-hour show. Thankfully, I miss it. Like, it's nice to have an evening with the family and actually have dinner with my wife and 2 daughters. So that's a nice little benefit to have. But man, I miss it each night that I'm not hosting it. So a lot of what we talked about today, the GM meetings are continuing on. We'll get into that a bit. Something that I haven't been able to talk about much, and I think has bigger implications when Devin Williams of St. Louis and one of the Milwaukee Brewers made the decision to decline his option, but still he's got arbitration year. I think that has implications for the sport of baseball and the way contracts are done. So I'll definitely get into that. There's a lot to get to tonight on the program.
Yeah, there is. And I'll leave you with this when it comes to contracts and free agency. It's a shame that Curt Flood is not on that Hall of Fame list that they are going to consider. I mean, I'm thrilled that Dick Allen is on it, that Ken Boyer is on it, 2 players who played for the Cardinals who I think are very much deserving. But gosh, I mean, Curt Flood changed the game. I mean, sometimes not, and he was a great player, by the way, great center fielder, but sometimes, you got to think bigger. I just don't understand why he does not get a bigger look.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, you think about the reserve clause and his role, and eventually, that was the first domino. He did not win in his battle, but that was the first domino for major change in baseball. And like you said, very good player all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum should be a place to educate as well and to teach about the history of the game. I mean, there is a place for Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame right now. He is displayed. There's displays of what he did. But if you were to put him in the hall, I mean, if you were to make that argument, you could put right there on the plaque what happened and let people understand about the history of the game. The same with Curt Flood. We need to teach not only fans, but our own players about the history of this game because, the years go by so fast. We don't want anyone to forget. Anyway, you did not forget about the Gashouse Gang. You are here with us. We are here every day at noon. Now, there's a little switcheroo, I understand, happening tomorrow. Are you jumping in tomorrow with the big dog?
Yeah, I'll be on with Bernie tomorrow, and then Wheels will be on with Bernie coming up on Friday.
And then we'll be back as a 4-man team on Monday, the Gashouse Gang. So you can see this. You're watching it on one of your favorite social media channels, but I highly recommend that you go to YouTube and just subscribe to KMOX Sports right there. You can also subscribe to KMOX 1120. They'll both get you to KMOX. But KMOX Sports YouTube page is going to be where all of these specific episodes are stored, the Gashouse Gang. You'll be able to see them on Facebook and X, and they're going to eventually be podcasts. We get a lot of these questions too on Apple, Spotify, the Odyssey app. They're stored in the Cardinals Conversations page at KMOX.com. They're everywhere, Matt. You just can't avoid the Gashouse Gang. And it's just so cool that we're able to interact and see our sports fans throughout the week. So we will be continuing to do this. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, this has been so much fun. I'm glad we're doing it.
Absolutely. Our producer is Drew Young. For Matt Pauley, I'm Tom Ackerman. Thank you for joining us. This has been another edition of the Gashouse Gang.